On the 5th of November, Russian President Vladimir Putin asked his Security Council in the Kremlin to prepare for nuclear tests. Putin's decision follows US President Donald Trump's 30th October statement that the US would resume testing nuclear weapons. Now, Trump's statement came just hours before his meeting with President Xi Jinping. Trump said that the United States needed to test nuclear weapons because Russia, China, and Pakistan were testing nuclear weapons. Now, US Energy Secretary Chris Wright clarified that the president didn't mean full-scale nuclear tests. But Trump's statement has traveled around the world, particularly in Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang. Now, if the United States does indeed test weapons, it will trigger off a global chain reaction. Now, Russia and China could follow the US lead and test nuclear weapons. Now, at the Kremlin meeting, Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov advised Russia. Now, at the Kremlin meeting, Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov advised Russia to immediately begin preparations for a full-scale nuclear test. Now, the readiness of the forces and assets at the central test site on the Novaya Zemlya archipelago, he said, made it possible for tests to be carried out within a short time frame. Now, there are 9 nuclear weapon states, and Israel is the only one of these 9 nuclear weapon states to have never conducted a confirmed nuclear test. All the other 8 nuclear weapon states have detonated over 2,000 nuclear devices since 1945. Now, over 80% of these tests were carried out by the United States and the former USSR. How are nuclear weapons test sites chosen? Well, from Nevada to North Korea, choosing a nuclear test site is a meticulous multi-stage process balancing science, secrecy, and safety. Now, 3 key factors that go into making up a nuclear weapons test site, like the one here at Semipalatinsk in the former Soviet Union, now in Kazakhstan. The first requirement is for geological stability. Now, open nuclear testing was banned in 1963. Countries thus have to rely on deep buried shafts to test their weapons. Hence, geology becomes an important factor. The area must be seismically quiet, meaning it shouldn't have active faults that could trigger earthquakes. It must have hard, dry rock that won't leak radioactive gases when the shaft is sealed. Factor number 2 is hydrogeology. Now, the test site must be deep several hundreds of meters below the ground so that the radiation does not poison the water table. Now, at India's test site in Pokharan, for instance, the water table is more than 500 meters deep under the soil. Now, the third factor to look for in a nuclear test site is the buffer zone. Now, to ensure that there is no human habitation and thus no civilians to be evacuated, it needs to be ideal for operational security reasons as well, to ensure that no country can deduce that atomic tests are underway. So those are the 3 factors when you look at choosing a nuclear test facility. But of course, most of the world's test facilities, in fact, all of them literally, are dormant because there has been no testing in several decades. But let's look at where the world's dormant nuclear weapons test sites are. The United States was the first country to test and use nuclear weapons. It tested its first bomb in White Sands, New Mexico. It has the Nevada National Security Test Site here in the state of Nevada. The US also has the Bikini and Eniwetok Atoll Island test sites in the Marshall Islands. The US hasn't, of course, tested a weapon since 1992, and all its sites, including this one here in Nevada, are dormant or they're closed. The US, of course, can reopen some of these sites to resume testing. Of course, that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, Russia, the Soviet Union's largest test site was at Semipalatinsk in present-day Kazakhstan, but that site is completely inactive for obvious reasons. It's in a different country. But recently, Russia has begun drilling tunnels in Novaya Zemlya. It's a remote island near the Arctic Circle. The northern part of this island is where the Russian nuclear test sites are. That is the site that the Russian defense minister alluded to. And if Russia plans to resume nuclear tests, it will test its weapons here. Now, this island is also where the Soviet Union tested the world's largest nuclear bomb, the 50 megaton Tsar bomba, which had exploded in the 1960s. Now, China tested its first atomic weapon here in the Lop Nor salt flats in Xinjiang in 1964. It has conducted nuclear tests here right until 1996. That's more than 3 decades of tests. This area was chosen for its isolation and remote and desolate nature. It covers an area of approximately 100,000 square kilometers. It's right there in Xinjiang. It's one of the most barren and remotest part of China, ideal for nuclear weapons tests. Now, North Korea was the world's last country to test a nuclear weapon. Now, North Korea was the world's last country to test a nuclear weapon in 2017. That's almost a decade ago. Its nuclear site is located here in Ponggye-ri, in this remote mountainous region of North Korea. North Korea has conducted 6 tests here between 2006 and 2017. Now, in May 2018, Pyongyang announced it was closing this facility down. The tunnels were destroyed in a ceremony witnessed by international journalists. But you can always count on North Korea to reopen its site and test if it chooses to. France. Now, France has tested its nuclear weapons in its overseas colonies, the Algerian Sahara, where it's conducted over 200 tests, and the Mururoa Atoll in French Polynesia, where it's conducted over 190 tests until the mid-1990s. India conducted its first atomic test in the Indian Army's Pokharan test range. Now, this range is over 26 kilometers northwest of Pokharan town in Rajasthan's Jaisalmer desert. Now, India has tested 5 more weapons in May 1998, establishing itself as the world's 6th nuclear weapon state. Now, India has also announced a moratorium on conducting further nuclear tests, but Pokhran is the test site for nuclear weapons for India. Now, finally, Pakistan. Pakistan conducted the first cold tests of its nuclear weapons here in Kirana Hills near Islamabad. But in 1998, it conducted its first full-scale nuclear tests, 5 nuclear tests at the Rasko Hills in the Chagai district of Balochistan. The tests were called Chagai 1 and Chagai 2. The United Kingdom is the country that has no test sites on its territory. Now, its primary nuclear test sites were in, believe it or not, Australia, including the Montebello Islands, the Emu Field, and Maralinga right here in the heart of Australia. This is where the United Kingdom tested its nuclear weapons in the 50s and the 60s. The UK has also conducted tests in the Pacific, the Christmas Island and the Malden Island. These are the 2 locations where it has tested nuclear weapons. The UK has also tested its nukes at the Nevada test site in the United States. Now, since the UK now only uses US atomic weapons under a very special arrangement, it will depend on the US for test data.